Hello there, everyone. Paul Elam here with another episode of A Voice for Men. Actually, this one is going to be a three-parter entitled The Plague of Modern Masculinity. In this, I want to take a little bit closer examination of what I see as the male role, the complicity from men, rather, in their current state of affairs in this world of feminist government in which we now find ourselves living. I hope you find it enjoyable and somewhat informative. Scores of our young men today are stranded at an impasse on the road to realizing their own manhood. They are bogged down in the confusion of a generation lost to treacherous forces they never saw for reasons they were never able to comprehend. They are struggling and starving, unable to feed their souls in a world that finds them increasingly unnecessary and burdensome. They have come of age in a time of coerced impotence, their nascent masculinity gutted and stripped long before having the opportunity to shape their character and their destiny. In that, they are suffering from the loss of things never held, from things missing but never known. They are quite literally a lost generation of the walking wounded, wandering blindly from a battlefield on which they never knew they stood. In that light, the path they are on is not really the road to manhood, but simply a retreat from the effacing malice woven into the very fabric of their developmental lives. And it takes them not to safe ground, but directly into a dismal culture of shallowness and self-indulgence, a realm of options without obligations, of self-gratification without self-awareness or self-discipline. It is the death march of the Western male, destined for a withering end ensured by intellectual, psychological, and moral atrophy. This aimless, narcissistic existence is a forced escape from lives shrouded in shame, from manhood being reduced to an evolutionary joke in the eyes of a culture that holds it in contempt even as the elders deny it is happening. With the wholesale whitewashing by society and abandonment by the fathers more or less complete, the newly de-engineered young man is all but defenseless against this downward spiral into terminal insignificance. It is happening all around us. One only need look at the current events to see that the world of men is quite literally circling the drain, disappearing from the stable foundations of education and employment. They are targeted with disinformation about crime and domestic violence and about deviant sexual proclivities with women and children. These are no longer just the ruminations of twisted ideologues. The demagoguery now emanates directly from the government, backed by men with gavels and men with guns. The judicial apparatus has been reshaped not to pursue justice, but to incarcerate men at every opportunity, even to enable and encourage false accusations to accomplish that goal. This isn't just about male bashing anymore. It's about male subjugation, and it is not being executed by feminists or women, but by men. We might proffer that the solution is a redirection to days past when we imagined that men made masters of sacred codes, when they possessed strength and purpose and would stand against this growing tragedy and defeat it. We would be wrong. We can only find that Thomas C. Wolfe was right. You can't go home again. And what's more, you really don't want to. It was, in a sense, home that got us here. And that is a truth we must face, no matter how natural or compelling the tendency to point to any other outside force and satisfy our frustrations with the simplistic convenience of an easily identified enemy. As always, our true enemy is in the mirror. The only thing that will save us is to face up to that and act accordingly. In the fitful and often strange world of the men's movement, we do attempt to answer this social malady, to create a haven, if only an intellectual one, for the refugees of this godforsaken gender war. It is a mission often hobbled by our own hands, yet the work goes on, limping toward solutions. We strive, I think, as men who have taken the red pill and seen through the matrix, to formulate an appropriate response, and in our own way to push some sanity and balance back into the collective consciousness, to force it past the architects of institutional misandry, both male and female. But even as we exert pressure, we don't have a firm grasp on what it is we're fighting. We have not ascertained, nor have we even really thoroughly tried to, what role traditional manhood plays in the problem. Unfortunately, what we have too often done is practice the obstinate politics of wounded children who insist they have no role whatsoever in what befalls their lives. We have at times angrily and energetically reacted to misandry, but have balked with equal vigor at seriously examining how we fostered and enabled it with masculine codes of conduct. Consequently, all our efforts rooted in this approach have failed, and miserably so. We have made some progress and will no doubt eventually mature into a more effective movement, but not before we embrace more than the hostility we feel for perceived enemies. Our most functional response thus far is to check out and go our own way, but I contend that an exit is not a destination, but just a needed removal from the line of fire, a chance to collectively regroup and rethink. Remember that the young men festering at those crossroads have in their own way checked out too. It isn't looking too good on them. That reality, sooner or later, will force us to swallow a pill that some will find bitter, and to face a reality that some will find unconscionable. You see, the feminists were right. Masculinity has, as it relates to modern realities, corrupt, oppressive, and destructive elements that need to change. And yes, I mean that literally, and no, I'm not kidding. In fact, the entire thrust of my argument here is that the monstrous social degeneration we are now witnessing more than anything else is the result of outmoded and horribly misguided masculinity. Of course, now once we dig more than an anemometer deep into the subject, we find that objectivity and reason veer us onto an entirely different philosophical trajectory than the pathologically twisted and apoplectic mindset of feminist ideologues. To chart our course, we will do two things that feminists never did. First, we will look at the subject without a politically driven agenda for unjustified revenge or a mandate to dominate the other half of the population. And two, we will proceed with the sincere goal of benefit for everyone, not just an elite group. The only sensible place to start is with a more grounded understanding of masculinity itself, something that can't be done here in 3 10-minute videos or however long it takes, but can, even with marginally appropriate treatment, arrive at far better conclusions than the last 40 years of women's and gender studies. We can rely on the combined contributions of history, mythology, politics, and most importantly, human sociobiology. For in the end, we're a species of animals whose very existence depended on the development of reproductive strategies, the primary of which is that the most aggressive and powerful males are selected for mating by the most reproductively viable females. Those strategies arose from an environment of necessity and produced an effective way to make offspring with the highest probability of survival. As a function of that survival, that strategy, and not a patriarchal conspiracy, shaped the male hierarchy, as well as what we now call masculinity. And that will be the topic of part 2 of this series, a little bit closer look at men and the hierarchy that they live under.